Right now, I'm sitting in a quiet office in Manhattan, staring at my phone like an idiot, because the number on my banking app still doesn't feel real. Every time I refresh the screen, it's still there. $12,084,331. $12 million. Sometimes I refresh it again just to make sure the bank didn't accidentally add an extra zero or something. 3 years ago, I was broke. Like, actually broke. The kind of broke where you check your bank account before buying a coffee and then decide you're not that thirsty after all. Back then, I was living in a tiny one-bedroom apartment in Ohio with creaky floors, a loud fridge, and neighbors who argued at 2 a.m. like it was their full-time job. My car barely worked, my job barely paid, and my bank account usually looked like $38.17 or something depressing like that. So yeah, if you told that version of me that one random Saturday would eventually turn into $12 million, I would have laughed in your face. Because the craziest part of this story isn't the money, it's how stupidly random it all was. There was no business plan, no startup, no crypto, no genius idea. It literally started with my car overheating on the side of the road. That's it. Just me, a broken car, and the worst timing imaginable. I remember sitting behind the wheel, watching steam come from under the hood and thinking, man, this day already sucks. So I pulled into a random neighborhood to let the engine cool down. And that's when I saw the cardboard sign taped to a streetlight. It said, "Garage Sale, Arrow." Now, normally I wouldn't care about something like that. But when you're broke and stuck waiting for your car to stop cooking itself, you start looking for ways to kill time. So I got out of the car, stretched my legs, and walked down the street toward the sale. At that moment, I had absolutely no idea that I was about to spend $5 on the single luckiest purchase of my entire life.
Mark and I just stood there, staring up at the hatch. It kept moving, just a little, creaking back and forth like someone had brushed past it. Mark swallowed hard. Dude, please tell me that was just the wind. I shook my head slowly. There's no wind down here. For a second, neither of us said anything. The silence in that bunker felt heavy, like the walls themselves were listening. Then Andrew, me, forced a nervous laugh. All right, relax. It's probably just loose hinges. Mark didn't laugh. Loose hinges don't move like someone just walked by. That's when we both heard it. A faint sound. Clank. It came from deeper inside the bunker, not above us, ahead of us. Mark immediately turned his flashlight toward the long concrete hallway stretching out in front of us. The beam cut through thick dust particles floating in the air. Old metal doors lined the corridor. Most of them were half rusted, some hanging slightly open. "Okay," Mark whispered. "Tell me you heard that." "Yeah," I said quietly. Another sound echoed. Scrape, like metal dragging slowly across the floor. Mark grabbed my arm. "Bro, someone's down here." My brain tried to come up with any normal explanation. Maybe another group of explorers, maybe a homeless guy hiding out. But something felt off. The bunker didn't feel abandoned anymore. It felt occupied. I forced myself to step forward. "If someone's here, we should just call out." Mark grabbed my shoulder. "Are you insane? We don't even know who it is." I took a deep breath and shouted down the hallway. "Hello?" My voice echoed through the bunker, bouncing off the walls. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, from the darkness at the far end of the corridor, a door slowly creaked open. So I figured, why not? My car clearly wasn't going anywhere for a while, and standing next to a steaming engine wasn't exactly my idea of fun. So I locked the door, shoved my hands in my pockets, and started walking down the street toward the garage sale. It was one of those classic suburban setups. A couple folding tables in the driveway, boxes full of random stuff, old lamps, stacks of books, mismatched plates, kids' toys, dusty picture frames, the usual garage sale chaos.
A middle-aged guy in a baseball cap was sitting in a lawn chair sipping coffee while his wife moved things around on the tables. There were maybe 3 other people browsing, slowly digging through boxes like treasure hunters hoping to find something interesting. I walked up and nodded to the guy. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I replied, trying to look like someone who actually knew what he was doing at a garage sale. The truth was, I wasn't really looking for anything. I was just killing time. Still, I wandered around the tables, picking up random things, an old radio, a stack of DVDs, some kitchen tools, nothing special, just the kind of stuff people want to get rid of when they clean out their house. Then, leaning against the side of one of the tables, I noticed something. A painting. It wasn't framed nicely or displayed like the other items. It was just sitting there, half hidden behind a box of old magazines. At first glance, it honestly looked kind of messy. Dark colors, weird shapes, brush strokes going in every direction. If I'm being honest, my first thought was that it looked like something a stressed-out art student might paint at 3 a.m. But there was something about it that made me stop. I don't know what exactly. Maybe the colors, maybe the texture, or maybe it was just the fact that it looked completely different from everything else there. So I pulled it out from behind the box and took a closer look. The frame was old and scratched, but solid, heavy wood, definitely nicer than the cheap poster frames you get at Walmart. I flipped the painting around and looked at the back. The canvas looked aged. There was a faint signature in the bottom corner, but the ink had faded so much it was almost impossible to read. Something like El Call? Or maybe Callow? I couldn't really tell. While I was staring at it, the guy in the lawn chair noticed me. He chuckled and said, "Man, you're the first person all morning who even looked at that thing." I laughed. "Yeah? Where'd it come from?" He shrugged. "Honestly, it's been sitting in our attic since we bought the house 10 years ago. No clue who painted it." I turned the painting back around and looked at it again. Still weird, still messy. But for some reason, I kind of liked it. Maybe it was the fact that my apartment walls were completely empty. Or maybe I just felt bad for the lonely painting sitting there. The guy took another sip of coffee and said casually, "Tell you what, if you want it, you can have it for $5. $5. I stood there for a second thinking about it. Now, $5 might not sound like a big deal, but when your bank account is sitting at $42, you start calculating everything. Gas, groceries, rent coming up, all that stuff runs through your head instantly. Part of me thought, dude, you don't need this. But the other part of me thought, is $5. Worst case, it just hangs on your wall and makes the apartment look less depressing. So I reached into my wallet, pulled out a slightly wrinkled $5 bill, and handed it to him. He smiled and said, "Well, congrats, you just bought the most mysterious thing in our attic." I laughed, grabbed the painting, and started walking back toward my car. At that moment, I thought I had just spent $5 on a random decoration. What I didn't realize was that I had just made the most profitable purchase of my entire life. When I got back to my car, the engine had finally cooled down enough to drive again. I carefully set the painting on the passenger seat like it was something fragile, even though I had no real reason to think it was valuable. It just felt old. The kind of old where you're not sure if it's junk or something that's been around for decades. I started the car, said a quick prayer that it wouldn't explode, and slowly drove the rest of the way to Walmart. The painting just sat there the whole drive, leaning against the seat. Every once in a while, I'd glance over at it and think, man, this thing is kind of weird. After grabbing some cheap groceries, ramen, eggs, bread, the usual broke guy survival kit, I headed back to my apartment. When I walked inside, the place looked exactly the way it always did. Plain, empty, kind of depressing, honestly. I dropped the grocery bags on the counter and leaned the painting against the wall in the living room. For a minute, I just stood there staring at it. Then I grabbed a hammer, found an old nail in a drawer, and hung it up above the couch. And that was it. No dramatic moment, no sudden realization, just a random painting on a random wall. For the next 2 years, it basically became part of the background of my life. I barely thought about it. Friends came over sometimes to watch games or hang out, and every now and then someone would notice it. Usually the reaction was something like, "Dude, what is that?" Or, "Did you paint that yourself?" One time, my buddy Jake stared at it for a few seconds and said, "Bro, I'm not gonna lie. It kinda looks like someone spilled paint on a canvas and called it art." Everyone laughed, including me. Because honestly, he wasn't wrong. It didn't look like something that belonged in a fancy gallery. It looked like something you'd find at a thrift store for $10. So, life kept going. Same job, same apartment, same routine. Wake up late afternoon, go to work, stack boxes all night, come home tired, crash on the couch. Sometimes I'd sit there eating takeout or scrolling on my phone, and the painting would just be hanging above me like it always had. Completely ordinary, completely unimportant. But every once in a while, something strange would happen. Someone new would come over, glance at the painting, and pause. Not laugh, not joke, just stare at it a little longer than normal, like their brain was trying to figure something out. I never thought much about those moments until one night when Jake brought his cousin over to hang out. Her name was Emily, and the second she walked into my living room, everything changed. She stopped mid-step, looked straight at the painting, and said, "Wait, where did you get that?"
At first, I thought Emily was joking. You know how people sometimes pretend to be dramatic about random stuff just to mess with you? So I laughed and said, "What, that ugly thing?" But she didn't laugh. She was still staring at the painting, like really staring at it. Jake noticed and said, "Yeah, my cousin's super into art stuff, like museum nerd level." Emily slowly walked closer to the wall, squinting a little as she looked at the brushstrokes. "Where did you get this?" she asked again. I shrugged. "Garage sale, $5." She turned and looked at me like I had just told her I found a gold bar in a cereal box. "Seriously?" "Yeah," I said. "Some random house down the road. Guy said it had been in his attic forever." She stepped even closer to the painting, leaning in so much that her face was only a few inches from the canvas. Then she pointed at the lower corner. "Have you ever looked at the signature?" I shrugged again. "Not really. I mean, I tried, but it's kind of faded." She pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight. The bright light hit the corner of the painting, and suddenly the faded ink became a little clearer. Emily tilted her head. Jake laughed from the couch. "What, did Picasso come back from the dead and paint it?" But Emily didn't even react to the joke. She was already typing something into her phone, scrolling, looking at images. Then she walked over to us and held up her screen. "Look at this." It was a photo of another painting. Different shapes, different colors, but the style looked almost identical. Same chaotic brushstrokes, same dark color palette, same kind of layered paint. At the bottom of the picture was a name, Leonard Calloway. I had never heard that name in my life, so I just said, "Okay, and?" Emily looked back at the painting on my wall, then back at the photo, then back at me. Leonard Calloway was an abstract artist in the 70s. His paintings sell for insane amounts of money now. Jake chuckled. "Yeah, right." But Emily shook her head. "I'm serious." She zoomed in on the image on her phone and pointed at the signature. Then she walked over to my wall again and pointed at the faded writing on the corner of my painting. "They look really similar." Now, I'll be honest. At that moment, I still thought this whole thing was kinda ridiculous. The idea that my $5 garage sale painting could be connected to some famous artist sounded like the setup for a bad reality show. So I laughed and said, "Okay, if this thing is secretly worth millions, I'll buy everyone here a mansion." Jake raised his hand. "Deal." But Emily didn't laugh. Instead, she said something that made the room go quiet. "You should actually get this checked out." I looked at her. "You're serious?" "Yeah," she said. Then she crossed her arms and looked back at the painting one more time. Because if I'm right, that might not be a garage sale painting. It might be something very different.
For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about what Emily said. At first, I tried to brush it off. I mean, come on. The idea that a random painting I bought for $5 at a garage sale could be worth serious money sounded completely ridiculous. Stuff like that doesn't happen in real life. That's the kind of story you see on TV. But the more I thought about it, the more curious I got. So one night after work, around 2 a.m., I sat on my couch, looked up at the painting, and said out loud, "All right, let's just check." I grabbed my phone and searched Leonard Calloway paintings. Instantly, dozens of images popped up. Abstract shapes, dark colors, heavy brushstrokes. And the weird thing was, the style looked really similar. Not identical, but close enough that it made me sit up a little straighter. Then I started looking at auction prices. One painting had sold for $2.1 million. Another one went for almost $4 million. My first reaction was just to laugh. "Yeah, okay," I said to myself, "there's no way." Still, Emily's voice kept echoing in my head. "You should actually get this checked out." So the next day, I did something I had never done before. I searched for art appraisal services. Most of them were in big cities: New York, Chicago, Los Angeles. Chicago was the closest one that looked legit. And after about 10 minutes of staring at the website, I finally thought, screw it, why not? Worst case scenario, some expert laughs at me and tells me it's a worthless decoration. No big deal. So a few days later, on my day off, I wrapped the painting in an old blanket, carefully put it in the back seat of my car, and drove 3 hours to Chicago. The whole drive I felt kind of stupid, like I was about to waste someone's time. When I finally arrived at the gallery, it was one of those places with huge white walls and bright lights where everything looks expensive. People inside were dressed like they belonged in magazines. Meanwhile, I walked in wearing jeans and a hoodie, carrying a painting wrapped in a blanket like some guy bringing laundry to a laundromat. The woman at the front desk looked up and smiled politely. "Hello, how can we help you?" I awkwardly placed the painting on the counter and said, "I was wondering if someone could maybe take a look at this?" She nodded and called one of the specialists. A few minutes later, an older man with glasses came out from the back room. He carefully unwrapped the painting and set it on a table. Then he leaned in closer, really close. For the next 20 minutes, he didn't say much. He just studied the painting, looking at the texture, examining the canvas, using a small magnifying tool to inspect the signature. The room felt completely silent. I remember shifting nervously in my chair, thinking, okay, any second now he's going to tell me this is worthless. But instead, something strange happened. The man slowly leaned back in his chair, looked at the painting, then looked at me, and asked one simple question. "Where exactly did you say you found this?" When I told him a garage sale in Ohio for $5, he actually laughed. Not a mocking laugh, more like someone who couldn't believe what they were hearing. Then he adjusted his glasses and said something that made my heart start pounding. Because if this is authentic, he paused for a second, this could be a lost Leonard Calloway painting.
When the expert said that, I honestly thought he was joking. A lost painting? From a famous artist? The one hanging above my couch next to a cheap floor lamp and a pizza stain on the wall? Yeah, that sounded insane. So I laughed nervously and said, "Okay, but realistically, what are the chances of that?" The man didn't laugh back. Instead, he carefully turned the painting over again and looked at the canvas. Then he pointed to the back. "See this?" he said. There were small markings on the wooden frame, faded numbers, barely visible. He explained that artists from that era sometimes used studio inventory marks like that. Then he pointed at the paint texture. The layering, the pigment aging, the brush style, all of it is consistent with Calloway's work. My brain was trying to keep up with everything he was saying, but honestly, most of it sounded like another language. Finally, I asked the only thing that mattered to me. "So, what does that mean?" He leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "It means we need to run a full authentication process. That takes a few months.
But if everything checks out, he looked back at the painting again, this could be extremely valuable. For the next 4 months, my life felt like a weird dream. Experts examined the paint, historians compared it to archived works, the gallery contacted collectors and databases that track missing art. And then one afternoon, I got the phone call. I remember exactly where I was. I was in the warehouse break room eating instant noodles when my phone rang. The same expert from Chicago was on the line. He sounded excited. "Congratulations," he said. "It's authentic." Turns out the painting had been missing for over 40 years. No one knew where it went after a private collector died in the early 1980s, until it somehow ended up in an attic and eventually at a random garage sale. The gallery suggested selling it at a major auction in New York. A few months later, I was standing in a huge auction room, surrounded by people who looked like they owned private islands. And on the stage, under bright lights, was my $5 painting. The bidding started at $1 million. My hands were shaking. Then it jumped to 2, then 3, then 5. The numbers kept climbing so fast my brain couldn't even process them. 7 million, 9 million, 11 million. Finally, the auctioneer raised the hammer and shouted, "Sold! $12 million!" The room applauded. I just sat there frozen. Because 3 years earlier, I was a broke warehouse worker with $38 in my bank account. And now a painting I bought for $5 had just sold for $12 million. Sometimes I still think about that moment. If my car hadn't overheated, if I hadn't walked down that street, if I had decided $5 was too much, none of this would have happened. So yeah, that's how I became a millionaire. Not with a genius idea, not with a startup, just a broken car, a random garage sale, and the luckiest $5 I ever spent.
Before you go, hit that like button and subscribe for more unbelievable stories just like this one. See you in the next story.